I guess we weren't
working.
we weren't working right last week. John informed me, so I still don't understand why.
Working, that sounds like a race car.
No, we're not gonna play duties.
I guess there's some way. Does he use that Tuesday morning or something back here?
Yeah.
He does use the sound? Okay. Huh? Now we're quiet on things. I don't know how it sounds to everybody else, but that really works. I can't hear you all talk, but I can sure hear that screeching. Comes through loud and clear. But everyone here that's been in the class is aware that we have been looking at the texts and manuscripts of the New Testament, and just refreshing a memory that we need to be aware there are no original manuscripts in existence. None have been found, so none exist as far as we know. But we have the assurance that God has preserved His Word through manuscript copies, and that's what we've been looking at the last couple weeks, and also pointing out that even though we do not have the originals, we have every assurance that we do have what is reflected in the originals. And one thing we pointed out, those that are critical of this are not consistent, because there's only copies, manuscript copies of writings of people like Plato and others in that time setting, and very few copies, and yet they don't criticize the textual integrity of those documents, yet they will criticize the textual credibility of the New Testament that we have. But we also looked at just a few important manuscript copies. We have some 5,700 that are available by Bible scholars out there, and looked at the different ones. The uncial manuscripts, first of all, kind of the oldest, and then the codex manuscripts. Those are the book form of the manuscripts that are available. And what we're going to look at briefly here, as you have in your outline there, the other New Testament witnesses besides these manuscripts that we had been looking at. So we'll start there, but I won't have that chart up, and then after we look at those briefly, then we will go on to this category we're calling textual criticism. We'll explain what will be involved in that particular part of our studies of the origin of the Bible. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Most holy and divine Father in heaven, we're thankful to you for this Lord's Day, and we're thankful for a time that we have to spend with fellow saints, and thankful for the encouragement we derive from our fellowship with one another and from our studies of your word. And we pray you'd bless us in our studies of your word this hour. Pray that you'd give us the wisdom we need to make proper application of our studies, our daily lives, and pray we'll use the things we learn to teach others of the importance of your will, and teach others, help others in a proper understanding of your will for our lives. We're thankful, Holy Father, for Jesus' sacrifice for us on the cross, thankful for the redemption this affords us, and pray to continue to bless us with the forgiveness of our sins as we make application of your word in our daily lives and live in accordance with your will day by day. We're mindful, Father, of those who remember they're gone because of illnesses, sicknesses, and pray you'd be with them, restoring them to their health, and be your will, so they can be in full service with us once again. We're thankful, Father, for all those that are studying your word this hour, the teachers of your word this hour, and pray that much good might come from our endeavors to serve you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just briefly, these other New Testament witnesses. First of all, the lectionaries, and you have there in that outline what these are. They are a manuscript arranged in sections, and their main purpose was in public worship service. They would read these in public worship service. Some of these date back 2nd and 3rd century that we have available. Most lectionaries are of the Gospels, but some do include Acts and also some of the epistles. There's some 2,200 lectionaries that have been discovered. These lectionaries often furnish valuable confirmation and evidence in certain problems of textual criticism, but they're not really useful in matters of detail. But they are something that are used by Bible scholars in addition to the manuscripts that we've talked about in the past. Any questions, comments about the lectionaries themselves and what they are? The next witness we would cite versions in other languages. As the New Testament message spread, it was translated into other languages, and these versions provide additional source of evidence of the genuineness and authenticity of the Scriptures, the New Testament text. Versions were in early centuries and still are made to supply needs. Versions, keep in mind, are translations from the Greek language into the language that was needed at the time. We're well aware, certainly after the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, Christianity spread rapidly, not only in Jerusalem and Palestine, but also up into Syria, Asia Minor, down into Egypt, Ethiopia, North Africa, on into Macedonia, Italy, and beyond. And so there was this need for the translation into the languages unique to those areas. History records that Alexander the Great, in his conquest of Western and Central Asia, Northeast Africa, tried to make the Greek language and also the customs of the Greeks universal, but very much successful, as history records, but they still were using their unique languages, their native languages. So the early churches in that day needed and desired translation of the Scriptures into their own languages, and that's what these versions are. That's what these translations are. And translations continue today, depending upon where you're going to have the Bible go into other parts of the world, and so that people can read it for themselves. And we'll have a little bit more on this whenever we get to our basically final lesson of the history of the English translation, English versions. Now, as to the value of these early versions, these early translations, a version of nothing, you understand, is an impossibility. If a translation exists, and they do, if a version exists, there must have been an earlier well-known and important composition of which it is a translation. It can't be a 2nd century translation of, say, a 4th century book. If the New Testament were translated in another language in 150 A.D., which it was because they have those available, then the New Testament certainly existed before 150 A.D. You see the line of reasoning there. And an early version proves the early existence of what it is the translation of, in this case the New Testament. So there's value in these versions, is what we're saying, and Bible scholars recognize that. And the main versions of translations available out there, the old Syriac that you have listed there, this translation of the New Testament was in circulation among churches in Syria around 150 A.D. and onward. There's also the old Latin version translated. The old Latin version was translated about 150 A.D., served as the Bible of the Western Church, that is Rome's domain in those early centuries. The Old Latin is by far the most important of the Latin versions, since it reaches back very close to the time when the last books of the New Testament were written. And then another noted version is the Peshitta. This is another Syriac translation. It's been in use since the 5th century, but a noted version or translation, at least used by scholars. And then you also have listing the Latin Vulgate. This work, which was begun by noted theologian, historian Jerome in AD 384, became the standard Bible for more than 1,000 years and was made the official Bible of the Roman Catholic Church from the time that it was brought forth until 1611 A.D. Then the King James Version became the authorized version used by the Catholic Church. Questions or comments on what we're saying about these versions as being other witnesses of the integrity of the reliability of the New Testament text? And then finally, early church fathers. Many volumes, and we've talked about this before, referred to it before, many volume literature exists from the era of the early church fathers, from 120 A.D. On into the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Many of their writings are filled with quotations from the New Testament. So these men possess copies of the New Testament, which are older than our manuscripts today. One Bible scholar, noted Bible scholar in this area, this field of studying, says, so extensive are these citations, these quotations, that if all other sources for our knowledge of the New Testament were destroyed, they'd be sufficient alone in reconstructing practically the entire New Testament. In other words, just by looking at the writings of these early church fathers and just taking their quotations of Scripture, in this case the New Testament, you could assemble virtually the entire New Testament just by them alone, if all these other manuscripts were gone that we've talked about. So it's significant that they're out there, and it's one of the sources that's used to compare text and try to make certain that what we have is the text originally reflected by the original manuscripts, and that's what we get into when we talk about textual criticism here now. Questions or comments on what we've said so far in our studies in the last couple of weeks in this field? Textual criticism then. Begin with this introduction to textual criticism and begin by defining it. And kind of alluded to this last week. Textual criticism in the past is sometimes referred to as lower criticism. It's the attempt to determine the original text of the biblical books. It is concerned, this field of study is concerned with finding out what the original text, the autographs of the Bible, actually said. That is, securing the text. I mentioned last week that criticism in this case is not used negatively. That's what we would immediately think, a lot of people would think. Bruce Metzger, in regard to this term textual criticism, a Bible scholar says, because at times the word criticism can mean finding fault with, it is important to note that when it's used here, it means evaluation. It means the analysis of something with the intent of determining its value. So it's not used in a negative sense. And I think it's just important for us to understand that. Textual criticism, again, sometimes used to be referred to as lower criticism, not be confused with what is also noted in biblical studies, higher criticism. Higher criticism involves judgments on the genuineness of the biblical text, that is the date, the unity of it with other New Testament documents, authorship, things of that nature. And the findings of higher criticism are often subjective in most cases, or not based on a high view of the Word of God. So there's a difference between lower criticism and higher criticism. We're not dealing with higher criticism, we're just dealing with this textual criticism. Questions or comments on the definition of itself? It is indeed the attempt to determine the original text of the biblical books. We don't have the original text of biblical books. So we're trying to assure, and we believe, we have this assurance, everybody in this class will believe, but we're trying to help others have the assurance that what we do have is a reliable accounting of what was in those autographed manuscripts. And it's this field of study, textual criticism, that Bible scholars have used for many centuries to determine that is the case. Now, as to the necessity of this, since the original manuscripts of the Bible don't exist, how can we know that the books of the Bible accurately reflect what the original authors wrote? Well, this process of determining what the original authors wrote is this task of textual criticism. The textual critic seeks to weed out the bad readings from the manuscripts, the copies, from what would be in actuality in the original text. So what they're doing is confirming that the books in the Bible accurately reflect what the original authors wrote. Skeptics, critics of the Bible, have pointed out that there are over 200,000 errors, as they would view it, in the New Testament manuscripts that are used to reconstruct the Greek New Testament text. And they imply that we can only guess at the original writings. So you may run into somebody who has that view of things because that's what they hear. Oh, there's over 200,000 errors in the New Testament alone. There's just simply no way in the world that we can trust it and think that we have an actual reflection of what God wants us to do for His will today. And there's others who have claimed that the Catholic Church made substantial changes in the Old Testament and New Testament, especially in the 4th and 5th centuries, to remove unwanted teachings and to add statements which would support their peculiar doctrines. So that's out there also. Well, textual criticism studies the history of the New Testament text in these manuscripts and dispels these claims. And that's what we'll be looking at here in our ongoing comments on textual criticism. Questions or comments regarding just the necessity of this alone? The sources of textual criticism, the sources used by Bible scholars. There are three classes of sources that scholars use in determining what the original writers of Scripture said. And that's what we've been looking at the last couple of weeks. Hebrew, and talk about the Old Testament especially, and Greek manuscripts. They look at this Old Testament and New Testament, but when you come to the New Testament, it's going to be Greek manuscripts. Ancient translations or versions into other languages we just finished talking about are also used by the textual critics to compare this with the manuscripts. And then also we talked about, when you're talking about the Old Testament, quotations by Jewish scribes in particular, and also early church fathers. Now, quotation by Old Testament, you can add to that, as we notice in our studies of the Old Testament integrity, the Jesus and the apostles quoting Old Testament passages. We have record of that in the New Testament. Of course, those that are skeptics would already say, well, that's the New Testament. You don't have any assurance that it's true, so whatever they say about the Old Testament's wrong. I mean, that'd be their line of reasoning. But anybody who accepts what the New Testament says and the integrity of that then would add then what Jesus and the apostles said when they quoted Old Testament writings from time to time. Questions or comments on the sources here that the textual critics use in determining the reliability of, in this case, we're mainly focusing on the New Testament text, but it applies to the Old Testament also. Question or comment?
I'd just hate to be the person that would stand before God and realize that they were calling him a liar.
Yeah, that's true on things on it. Yeah, that's true on it. And unfortunately, I guess you'd say the number of people who have that view of the Scriptures far outweighs the number of people who have the assurance that what we have is God's Word on things. It's unfortunate. Satan has deceived many, many people for many, many centuries in regard to the integrity of both the Old and the New Testament. Answering this question, has the Bible been rewritten so many times that we cannot trust? It's a common misconception. Some people think that the Bible was written in one language, translated into another language, then translated into yet another, and so on, until it was finally translated into English. That's their concept. That's what they've basically been told about this. And the complaint is that since it was rewritten from one language to another language to another language so many times in different languages throughout history, it must have become corrupted. You're aware of the telephone analogy. You see it on some kind of comedies. Someone calls up a friend and they say something, a sentence, and then that friend calls up another friend and it's changed. That friend calls up another friend and the sentence is changed. By the time you get to fourth or fifth friend called, the sentence they say is nothing like what the first person said. You see, in other words, you got one person saying one thing, or translating in their version what they heard, and then the other person translating their version what they heard that person say. That's the analogy that's used and used to deceive people. But the only problem with this analogy is it doesn't fit the Bible at all. The fact is that the Bible has not been rewritten in that fashion. Just New Testament, for example. Disciples of Jesus wrote the New Testament in Greek. And though we don't have the original documents, we do have around, as we noted, some 5,700 copies of the Greek manuscripts that were made very close to the time of the originals. And we looked at these various manuscripts or copies agree with each other to almost 100% accuracy. Statistically, the New Testament is 99.5% textually pure. We noted that. And this means that there's only a half of 1% of all the copies that do not agree with each other 100%. But if you take that half of 1% and examine it, you find that the majority of the problems are nothing more than spelling errors or very minor word alteration. We'll talk about that more here as we get under a study. So just an example, instead of saying Jesus, a variation might say Jesus Christ. So the actual amount of textual variation of any concern at all is extremely low. We can say that we have an extremely accurate compilation of the original documents. So all that said, when scholars translate the Bible, they do not translate from a translation of a translation of a translation. They translate from the original language, in this case Greek, into, we're talking about English, our language. It's a one-step process, not a series of steps that would indeed lead to some kind of corruption. It's one translation step from, in this case, the Greek manuscripts to the English or whatever language a person needs to read it in. So scholars, they translate into Spanish from the same Greek manuscripts. Likewise, they translate into the German from those same Greek manuscripts as well. And this is how it's done for each and every language they translate the Bible into. They do not translate from the Greek manuscripts to the German, then to the Spanish, and then to the English, like this telephone analogy is on things. It's misconception. It is from the Greek to the English. It's from the Greek to the Spanish, if that's a translation of version 1. It's from the Greek into the German, if that's a translation that's being in question. Therefore, the translation is very accurate and trustworthy regarding what the Bible originally said. But it's just a criticism I think we need to be aware of, and one that's out there. You may not run into that much on things. You may not have that much opportunity to talk to somebody about it, but it is out there, the contention that the Bible has been rewritten from one language, another language, another language, so often that it has to be corrupted, And if that were the case, from one language, another language, why, yeah, then that may be the case, but that's not what has actually taken place. Question or comments? Yes, Jay.
When approximately, or do you know, when was the Bible first translated into English? Was that 1400?
The Bible first translated into English. See, I've got that in the next study on things. It seemed like it may go back to the 1400s. Now, we are aware of the King James Version as far as that goes. Let me see if I don't have those notes printed out here yet on things, so I'll have to look at that. But it seemed like it goes back even farther than that, because English had been around longer than that. But, Cal, you know.
When was Wycliffe?
I'm sorry?
When was
Yeah, I'm trying to think Wycliffe. I think it was like 14 or 1500 is what I think. And I think you're probably right in that ballpark. in that ballpark, one of the first English versions that we're aware of, at least, on things. Most of us think about the 1611 King James Version, but there were versions before that, for sure. Look at variant readings under the heading of textual criticism. Variant readings are these differences in the text between the various manuscripts and translations and partial quotations of the scriptures. Now, so you understand, we're not about just variant readings in the 5,700 manuscripts, but we'll talk about that here in just a moment if that's all you want to relate it to, or they want to relate it to. But it's also variant readings in the 5,700 manuscripts compared with the translations and also the quotation of the scriptures. As to the Old Testament, the existing manuscripts, like we talked about before, compared to the few. And the variant readings, thus, are few, about 2,000, Bible scholars would say. I mentioned before that Hebrew manuscripts were copied by an official class of copyists under strict rules, and they conformed to a very high standard. And manuscripts with errors were destroyed, and that accounts for the fact that there are only a few accurate copies out there. In the case of the New Testament, as we've talked about, there are many more manuscripts, about 5,700, and also all these other sources that we talked about, translations and partial quotations of the New Testament scriptures. And these copied in various parts of the world, and not necessarily by an official class. And many of the scribes and other copies very careful, but some were careless. It's obvious some were careless, and scholars do say that the number of variant readings is about 200,000. So whenever critics, skeptics of the Bible say that, they're right. There are about 200,000 variant readings. Now, I wouldn't call them errors, but they're going to call them errors. They're going to call them errors, you see, but they're variant readings among these manuscripts, and that's what we'll talk about here in the heading of textual criticism, why I wouldn't view them as errors, but just variations in the readings on things. Cal?
Well, 200,000 in one manuscript, even if it's of the entire Bible, would be very, very significant. But when you scatter 200,000 over 5,700, and many of those variant readings are identical, so you may have the same identical reading in maybe 150 of these manuscripts, okay? But it's all counted as an individual variant reading.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
The number's much smaller than you would think.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about here in regard to the reality of what we do find in these 200,000 variant readings. The variations include such matters as difference in spelling, transposition of letters, words and clauses, order of words, order of sentences. Sentence is the same in this manuscript and this one, but the order has changed, just like our modern versions. If you're reading in the King James Version and last reading from New American Standard or New American Bible, whatever it is, New American Standard, you're going to see the same sentence, but it's changed in order on things. So you get the same meaning, you see, but that's considered a variation. Now, the critics will say it's an error on things. It's not an error, it's a variation in the reading. It hasn't affected doctrine at all, and very often not even the translation is affected. And just like I mentioned earlier, one manuscript may say Jesus, and another manuscript in that same text says Jesus Christ. Well, is that an error? It's a variation, but it's not an error, you see. But it's counted among these 200,000 variations. People, they hear there's 200,000 variant readings, and they become alarmed, and they question integrity in the scriptures without hearing what really is involved in these textual variations. Number one, as Cal alluded to, if you only had 5 manuscripts and you had 200,000 variant readings, that'd be a matter of concern. But divide 5,700 into 200,000 and see what you get. 35 per 5,700, if my addition, subtract, division is right on things. See what I'm saying? you've got 35 variant readings among these 5,700, and that's just the 5,700 manuscripts. See, that doesn't include all the versions that are compared also, and the quotations by the early fathers that are compared out there. It becomes a very, very small amount is the thing that we're saying. Also, by 200,000 variant readings, it's not meant that there are 200,000 places where variations occur, but that there are that many variant readings in all, and Cal alluded to this also. If one manuscript has a certain reading, and 20 others have a different reading, even though those 20 are the same, all 20 are counted. See, it's just like I said again, one manuscript may say Jesus, and 20 others say Jesus Christ. Well, it's counted as 20 variant readings, you see, on things. It ought to be counted as one, it looks like, but it's counted as 20 in this 200,000. Many are counted that are simply misspellings of a word. The word is clear, but it's just misspelled. But they can still very clearly tell, even though it's misspelled, that that is the word, but it's still counted. Now, again, critics of the Bible, skeptics, say, well, that's an error. Well, technically, it's just a variation. It's a misspelling of the word. It may be clear what this word is in 20 copies, but each misspelling is counted 20 different times because it appears 20 different times. Yes.
Well, there's so many of them that's so hard to pronounce. How would you know how to spell it?
Yeah, that's it.
Without something getting different.
That's it, right? And that's something too to the point next make. It's got to be remembered that there are no original manuscripts that exist as far as we know. All we have are copies, laborers made by hand. So, suppose someone should write a letter, a manuscript today of 100 pages, and then let 10 people copy it. From the original, from copies, doesn't make any difference. How many variations are going to appear? There's probably going to be at least 10.
Times 10.
Yeah, 10 times 10 variations. There may not be errors, technically, a change in what the meaning of the original document was, but there's going to be some problems there of comparing those. Now, suppose 100 people should make copies of that one original, not just 10. Suppose that the work is done now in Greek rather than in English, even by those who are familiar with Greek. What about variations? You've got a person who's a scholar and well-versed in English, and he's looking at the Greek translation, and he may be well-versed in Greek. Is he going to have some maybe variation as he copies this? Further, suppose that the Greek is the old uncial style. Remember what we talked about, the old uncial style, the oldest manuscripts we have? No punctuation, no space between the words, all capital letters, the words run together. What's the possibility of having some variations in the copyist there on things? Sure, 200,000 variations, but as we're going to be looking at here in our next part of our study of this, they're not significant. All Bible scholars that are honest in looking at it will tell you they're not significant.
Well,
Yes.
you know, if all the different versions of the Bible, the scholars, were they all translated from the same manuscripts, text or was there one thing translated into English and then they all give their version from that, or do you know?
Well, good question, and kind of talked a little bit about that last week when we were looking at the manuscripts themselves. The King James Version, 1611 version, there was only one of these manuscripts available. Now I say only one of these codex manuscripts available. A lot of these other uncial manuscripts are available, and the quotations and everything. And so the King James Version, the committee that put that together, they just had that one accessible to them to study and used it. But then 1901, I believe it is, when the American Standard Version Committee developed the American Standard Version, they had 5 or 6, because they'd been found by that time, made available public, of these codex manuscripts. So they had more to look at and more other findings of manuscripts out there, and so they utilized everything they had then to make the American Standard Version or
So our versions
translation.
aren't translated from the same doctrine, from the
Yeah.
same,
Yeah,
from the same source.
right. Now that, and I would say that about committee translation. You understand what I mean by committee translation? They've got a committee of people, 50 to 100 people, that are all Bible scholars from different, what we call denominations, and you don't have one person that's just trying to put in their particular doctrinal teaching. There's a whole lot of individual translations out there, or such as the New World Translation that was compiled by the Watchtower Tract Bible Society, that you can see there's perversions of the text. They changed it to fit their doctrine on things on it, but they claim to have gone back to more accurate manuscripts and that type of thing in their translation. But it's clear whenever you look at it that they actually put some translations in there to confirm their doctrine, conform with their doctrine on it. And it's easy to see because they weren't consistent on things. Like John 1, chapter 1, so they don't believe that Jesus is deity. So they translate that a God, and they claim that they've got evidence that that's the way it should be translated. But there's other phrases where they don't translate it that way in the New World Translation on things, so they're not consistent in it. But they have it in that part of it because it conforms to their doctrine that Jesus was not deity from the beginning. I don't know if I touched on your question, answered a little bit
I
on
was
things.
just kind of always wondered if it's maybe translated over from Greek and stuff over into the English language, and then scholars took it from there and wrote the different versions of the Bible. But I didn't really know.
Well, I imagine that's happened. That's probably happened too. Some just take the English version, and I wouldn't. I'd be leery of that if it's evidence that is the case. Just like I said before, that you got that situation that the skeptics say of the Bible. Well, it was translated from Greek into English, and then now to this, so there was probably some kind of variation, and there could have been that telephone analogy again on things. But the committee translators, the ones where the committees get together, they go back to the original manuscript, the Greek manuscripts, right? And they're not using the English version then to compare to the original Greek. They're just discounting what the English, like the 1611 version, the 1901 committee for the American Standard Version wouldn't take what the King James Version said as being an accurate reflection of the Greek manuscripts. They discount that. They're going right back to the original manuscripts and look at them themselves. And again, like I said, they had access to more manuscripts that were found at that time. It makes sense to not just take what the King James Version utilized in the way of manuscripts for textual
Addressing
integrity.
what he said, the early versions that were written, the Syriac, the Peshitta, the Vulgate, the Old Latin versions, all those versions came out of the original, were copies of the original Greek.
Yeah.
And the people that then sustained those versions and kept copying them had the same responsibilities that those that were doing it of the Greek. So you had the same principle of being applied across all sections there, where the copyists were the copyists and they were trying to keep it as pure to the original as they could. So I don't see any difference there. But there are versions, there are translations out today in different countries where there's an obscure language and there's one or two people that can translate, and they have translated, but typically they have used English or whatever the native language was to do the translation from the Bible they were using. So those could be suspect, if you will, for having maybe some errors in them. Even if they were trying to do it the very best they could.
Further question, comments on what we looked at here? Things. Did I put that second point up there? Yeah, differences in spelling, transition letters, and words, clauses, so on and so forth, but no doctrine affected on things. Which leads us then to looking at these textual variations. There's two general, we'll call them mistakes, made in the copying process, and they fall under the categories of unintentional errors and intentional errors. Now, I'm using the term errors accommodatively because this is the way that the textual criticism scholars would look at it on things. Even though, again, Jesus, compared to Jesus Christ, is not an heir technically. It is a variation, but they put it in these two different categories. With respect to the unintentional errors, they're categorized as make mistakes of the hand, eye, and ear. Copyist makes a slip in the hand. We'll talk about a bit, or else he doesn't quite see it right when he look in here, and then he puts it down here, a mistake of the eye, or here. Some of the copyists, they didn't read what they were copying. It was dictated to them. So it would be like you trying to dictate to me some New Testament passage, and I'm trying to write it down from what I hear, and I may have misunderstood what I heard, but I write that down on things. That's the category we're talking about here. Yes, Jeff?
Well, a problem with someone making a change to improve the text or whatever, to make a change, if the person was inspired by God to write this stuff, and then someone else takes it on themselves to make a change, what are we getting?
That's a problem, and that's under the intentional errors type of thing. We'll talk about that. There are some evidence of those that the copyist did put in something that shouldn't have been there, and we're after the assurance that it hasn't destroyed the integrity of the text or made some kind of a doctrinal change on things, and so we'll talk about that on things. There's evidence, and how they find that out, textual critics, is you've got all these manuscripts out there, and the other things that they have access to, and they're trying to see whether this passage, just as an example, John chapter 8, 1 through 11, the account of the woman caught in adultery. That passage does not appear in a whole host of manuscripts out there, but it appears in one or two. How did it get in one or two when it's not in a whole host out there? Well, the evidence is somebody put it in there. But, as we'll talk about, does it teach false doctrine? It doesn't, you see. The New Testament's clear elsewhere on adultery and what Jesus would teach someone that was caught in it: go and sin no more. And what Jesus may teach someone who hypocritically brings this woman before him and says, judge her, judge her. He said we have enough teaching of Jesus in other places about judge not lest you be judged and that type of thing, that it reflects, you see, still a true doctrine. So we're going to look at some of those. There's a few, and I've listed a few of the main ones that critics of the Bible would refer to on things just as examples of these things. But it's a valid concern on things, and we need to have assurance in our own minds, which I believe we do, but be able to converse with others who don't have that assurance about those type of things.
So you think the committees then found where there were errors that may have changed a little of the inspirational out of it, the inspiration out of it, they realized that and have probably got that fixed?
They do, and you have a Bible with footnotes in? Probably? Okay. We're going to point that out on things. I use New King James Version, and places like that, John chapter 8. If you look at the footnote, you'll probably have it in there. It'll say, this is not found in most manuscripts on things. So even the committees that may have put it in based upon enough evidence that ought to be in there, they're still going to let you know, well, now wait a minute, you need to understand that this isn't in most manuscripts on things. So that's a good point too on things, and we can point that out. If you don't have a Bible with footnotes, or some may not have it in there, but we'll point that out too. Our time is gone. I appreciate your attention and questions, comments here this morning, and we'll finish up, I'm pretty sure, this part of our study next week, and might be able to get in the next one. I'll get you
I know
that
we're
one for
always
that.
saying, the reason I brought that up, we're always saying that all these scriptures are inspired.
Yeah.
So if there is errors and stuff, I just wonder, does it change,
She's
you
doing
can
a
change
little
any informational
because they
scripture
couldn't
and
finally
make it
pick
their
one
own.
out.
That's all. But you pointed out the cities that reckon that probably.
Easier,
Hear that.
you don't have to,
The,
it can be infusion.
the copies
Twice a day.
are not inspired, we realize, I don't think, but do they reflect?
But they're supposed to be writing down what love, they're supposed to be writing down what love inspired.
At your house?
No, not at her house.
I mean, well, and she's
Let's
doing.
take John on before we find out who
The
did it.
PIC line was left in so they could use it.
Yes, that's what you're talking about. Oh, the home nursing.
Yeah, and you can't
Jesus
shower
Christ.
without
It's
having
just
to
like
wrap it
women
somehow.
recipes
Because
and
it,
say,
you
oh,
can't get it
Can't
wet.
get it wet. Oh, well, that's.
Anyway, it was kind of
they might
good
say,
to rub it against her nose.
or she sits out there and they're gonna
Hi,
still say
Dad.
It was kind of getting old.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
because
it
how
It
old
doesn't
is
change
It's
the app, the meaning,
like
the
over a
outcome
couple of months?
of it.
Lady got in
but
the
now,
says
oh my
I
dad,
was giving him the women's.
I go so fast
I
anymore.
think it's been like
original
before Christmas.
Christmas.
I can't keep up anymore. The months go faster than I can.
For instance, he
I
said the
haven't
letter
seen her in a
J
long
I know. You know, you're probably right, because my picture's on that
1400.
message.
So how can you call Jesus Jesus if the J wasn't
Oh,
there?
oh, yeah, medicine actually had a
So it's been
surgeon.
good
If I encourage you, give a card. He said he would be here, not this Sunday. He said he's okay. He said one of the problems is like in the beginning, God created man, heaven and earth. Then he says over where it says God, where man created, Lord God created. He says, what's the difference? Which one is it? Is it God or is it the Lord? He says, there's a difference. I don't think there's a difference.
Well, it's not, it's just, God has many names, you know, that, Jehovah, or Lord, or, Wonderful Counselor, a whole host of names.
Well, he says each name is different.
Yeah.
He said originals are different. He says you gotta know, according to him, you gotta know Hebrew. But then again, he says the New Testament was written in Hebrew and Arabic. It wasn't written in Greek. So
He fixed up on that. They
He's
didn't see it
mixed up
make it a
easily.
common language, but when it wrote, the New Testament time wrote it. in
well,
Greek.
actually, in the area where it was wrote, Greek was common language.
Yeah, yeah, common language too, yeah.
You know, the surrounding area surrounding it
Yeah.
was Arabic, but the area where it was wrote was Greek. All around the Mediterranean area was Greek. Around the surrounding area on the outskirts was Arabic. So the original text was Greek, not Arabic. In the Old Testament was Hebrew.
Come on, kids.
I get tossed up on who's the shortest around here, Brother Jessica. I'm talking about the grown-ups. I done turned that thing there off up there.
You did, all right, sounds good.